Kent Busek back with us on the top of the program this hour of Busek Olson and Associates, and one of those great business minds we love to tap and just talk about some things in the news. How are you, Kent?
I'm doing well, Scott. Yourself?
You're just back from Western North Dakota, I understand, huh?
Yeah, I went out to Country Fest out in New Salem Friday, Saturday night, and during the day I drove around Western North Dakota and got the opportunity to see how much that's evolved over the last 5 or 6 years. But it's really interesting when you get out there. Still a lot of activity. You just don't see it like you used to, but I think just nothing but positives out there.
So you came away with things that are maybe a little more robust than people realize?
Well, I think the one takeaway I got, speaking with a friend of ours, the former lieutenant governor, I was surprised they were pumping as much oil as they were. They're at 1.1 million barrels a day, which is, it's down from the peak, but still, I think it's come up. But there's drilling being done. There's activity. You just don't see it because the infrastructure has been put into place in a majority of the core Bakken. The pipelines are the gas pipelines, the oil pipelines are there. There's just not the trucks on the road like there used to be. There's not the flaring. They're just pumping a lot of oil and looking at the next phase.
It's great for North Dakota.
It is, and I don't think here in the east, in Cass County and eastern North Dakota, western Minnesota, they don't realize the impact. There's 40 to 50,000 people that have permanently moved out there. I mean, you look at Watford City, Williston today versus 15 years ago. Those people have come here. They've stayed here.
Great points. Speaking of the former Lieutenant Governor, Brent Sanford, he sent along news on a big story today. ExxonMobil is buying Denbury Resources. And for folks that are not familiar with Denbury, they built a CO2 pipeline from Wyoming to Bowman. Got it permitted, began injecting CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, and Exxon has now bought them. I would guess, Kent, an acquisition like this happens to buy their technology, and the fact that there's a big debate going on about the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline and people saying, hey, I'm worried about putting CO2 in a pipeline. They've done it. It's happening. It's operating.
It's already happening, and not only it's two things with that. Number one, it's the carbon capture, which so as the governor, Burgum, has said by 2030 or 2040, we want to be carbon neutral. Many states want to become carbon neutral. This is a way for North Dakota to become carbon neutral and still pump a million barrels a day. But I think more importantly with this is Exxon. This is,
biggest of the big.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do projects all over the world, billion-dollar projects. Well, now they've just made a big investment. And that's always been the thought, again, going back, that, it would be the smaller players like the Denburys or the Whitings who no longer, they may still be in business. But
it's Cord now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those companies that came and developed the Bakken would eventually transition over to the Exxons, the Hesses, once they got it up and running. Once the manufacturing is in place, they'd come in. So we're starting to see that happen. And again, what that means, it's a permanency to western North Dakota and the legacy that's had that the oil is going to keep pumping.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know the industry well, when we talk about enhanced oil recovery, the life of a well, starts strong and then diminishes. And at some point, you cap the well. You've got all the oil that you're going to get out of that particular well. But with enhanced oil recovery, it allows you to go back in because we're really only getting about 10%, 11% of the oil in the rock now. So with things like enhanced oil recovery, what you do with CO2, you now extend the life of a well. It's, again, more money for the coffers of the North Dakota taxpayers.
Well, and again, go back to the start of the Bakken, 4 or 5% recovery is what they were hoping for when they were doing the fracking. And today with the technology change and just them being better at it, smarter at it, and understanding the technology, they're at 10%. But you're exactly right. They take an existing well, they pump the carbon into it, they refrac it. So again, you just don't have a footprint like you used to redo a well. So again, they're going to double, maybe even triple the production out of the well, which then means what? North Dakota's just got that much more oil to sell and help fund everything else in the state.
Exactly right. There's nothing but good news there. And again, I say this often, but out of sight, out of mind, as you said earlier, some folks on the east of North Dakota and the west of Minnesota are not aware of what's going on out there. But the dollars touch every corner of North Dakota.
Well, without question, what is half of the revenue in North Dakota, the state revenue? It comes from oil. So again, whether the Burgum-Sanford administration, the current administration, previous administrations, you've got to encourage this. I mean, we've talked about this for 15 years when Harold Hamm originally came back. I remember when you were on I-29 up the road just starting out, and we had a conversation about this, that, you have to encourage this business model to succeed in North Dakota, and they've done that by making the taxation easier. The regulation is easier than other parts of the country. They've developed a business model to make sustainable for many, many years, to help provide benefits to the citizens of North Dakota.
Yeah, because that's who ultimately is the beneficiary. There's no doubt about it. Let's talk about tax time. It's kind of come and gone now, but I'm curious to your thoughts on, you get a sense working with a lot of different business owners, a lot of different people, about how the economy's doing, how businesses are doing. What's your sense of how things are faring these days?
Well, I've said this for the last number of years. We're so fortunate to be located in Fargo, North Dakota, and the business opportunities that exist right now. And business, for the most part, in town or in the region is good. The limiting factor for many business, and you hear this every day, is I need people. I could grow my business if I had people. So even though the fact that Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo, Cass County has a net import of 4,000 to 5,000 people a year, that's 400 to 500 a month. So you wonder why all the houses are being built in Fargo, all the apartments are being built in Fargo. They're needed because people are moving here. But the amazing thing is, businesses need more people, whether it's tech businesses, whether it's manufacturing businesses. A business like mine, I could grow the business. So it's a very good business environment. Yes, 7% interest rates have slowed some things down. But again, the good operators are still going to operate. They're still going to manufacture. They're still going to build. The jobs are good if you want to work in this area.
Is access to capital, because of the interest rates, inching up a problem? I heard Kevin O'Leary the other day say that small businesses are having trouble getting access to capital.
It's going to be tighter, but then on the flip side, too, your investors want a higher rate of return because if the bank is paying 5% for a CD, well, then the business owner might have to go out and raise capital at 10 or 12%. Whereas 2 years ago, when the CD rates were like 1%, the smaller business, let's say they bring in outside capital, they could get the money for 5 or 6. So again, the cost of capital is getting more expensive. But again, the good projects are going to happen.
Speaking of Kevin O'Leary, he made a kind of controversial comment when he came here because he was here with the North Dakota Department of Commerce, talking about some of the vibrant, basically echoing exactly what you said about North Dakota and how fortunate we are to be here and the business economy and the business opportunities that are here. But he contrasted that with Minnesota. And he said Minnesota is basically Cuba, uninvestable was his exact phrase, which caused a little bit of heartache for North Dakota Department of Commerce folks, because now their colleagues in Minnesota are saying, thanks a lot for bringing this guy in who calls us uninvestable. I want to get your take on the difference between Minnesota and North Dakota when we come back, okay?
Will do.
So is Minnesota Cuba, Kent?
Well, where Kevin was wrong on that, he should have said it was Moorhead was a cold Havana versus just Havana.
That's true. The climate is significantly different. Yeah,
some significantly different. I see it. Just the difference in taxes. Take somebody that makes $100,000 or $200,000, which it's not a lot of money. You hate to say that, but a couple family making $200,000,
3 kids, 4 kids, yeah.
But in this economy, couple jobs. I mean, a lot of people do it. The difference in the cost of living in Minnesota from a tax perspective versus North Dakota, it's $15,000 a year in taxes. But not only that, you live in Moorhead versus North Dakota, you buy a $300,000 house 10 years ago, that house in Fargo is probably worth $400,000 to $450,000. That house in Minnesota is worth $350,000, maybe $375,000. You're not going to have the appreciation because you don't have the growth. Moorhead grows 300 to 400 people a year. West Fargo grows 400 people a month. So there's a reason why people are living here. It's regulatory, it's taxes, and it's opportunity. I have a business outside of my accounting firm that's involved in the construction industry, an add-on to the construction industry, and we try to not do work in Minnesota just because of some of the things that you have to do over there. And it's more expensive to do business. It's harder to get projects done. And if you get the OSHA or the job worker safety involved in these type of projects, it's just add-on work. My people don't want to go over there and work. They want to do work in North Dakota. So I think as more and more regulation and more rules come in and more taxation from the Walz administration start kicking in, there's going to be more and more people that are on a border community like us that are going to have the same perception. If you're down, like my friend Frank down in Alexander, he was listening. He listens all day to the flag. I always say radio works. He usually would listen to me on the Chris show, but he's already texted in that Frank is listening. But somebody in Alexandria, they're stuck. They're going to have to deal with this. The Family Leave Act now that you can take 6 or 8 weeks off now just because Scott, you don't look well. You should take 6 or 8 weeks off.
Yeah, that Family and Medical Leave Act is just
and the cost that's going to happen. So I think what they did in Minnesota in the last legislative session, not only did they have the big surplus that they didn't give back, but again, just the programs that they added, the cost of doing business is just going to get more and more expensive over there, which in turn is going to be a benefit to North Dakota.
What do you make of their ploy for free education in Minnesota? Is that going to impact North Dakota?
Well, the article that was read or put out from the two state presidents, UND and NDSU, they said a $8 to $10 million impact to the school. So I was trying to figure out what that meant. If it costs $20,000 a year to send a kid to school in North Dakota, does that only mean we're losing 400 or 500 students, or does that mean we're losing 1,000 students? But if you stop and think about it, Minnesota students already get reciprocity. So North Dakota is subsidizing those students to come here. So if we lose some of them, so be it. But here's the thing. The strong programs at UND, NDSU, Mayville, Valley City, the teaching programs, the engineering, the ag programs, the strong programs where they send out a high caliber graduate, they're gonna be strong. And if anything, it might make some of the other programs stronger because, hey, if we got to compete with free tuition over there, we need to be better over here.
Last hour, we were teasing the topic of a common refrain you hear from people who say, okay, you oppose the student loan bailout, but did you get PPP? Did you get some of the COVID dollars? Do you take advantage of farm programs? Is that a proper analogy?
Absolutely not. I mean, they're three different things. So more specifically, because I think more people understand it or are aware of it, the PPP compared to the student loan program, apples and oranges. Take the PPP program. I got PPP. Scott, you might have. I don't know. I hope you did because it was available to you. PPP was there for me to pay my employees because when we got shut down on March 17th, 2020, we had no idea what was going to happen. In the tax business, my revenues dropped 90% overnight, and I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, this was a lifeline. And again, it was a Congress-passed plan. It was virtually unanimous between the two houses, both in Congress and the Senate. So it was a bipartisan deal. Everyone was on board with it, and everybody knew what the program was. If you provided those dollars and kept your employees on for the 8-week period or the 12-week period, it was forgiven. Now, if you've laid off your employees or if your employee numbers went down, you had to pay it back. It was a loan. That's what you signed up for. So you signed up for, it was quote unquote a government program, but you had to comply with the rules. Now, there was also, and what's not talked about, there's also many other government programs that happened at this time that you have to pay back. And they don't talk about that. So, in addition to PPP, there was SBA dollars that are available, up to $2 million for a small business. So again, nobody talks about that, though. You might have gotten PPP and then did the Small Business Administration EIDL loan, economic injury disaster loan program. Well, you're paying that back for the next 30 years, very similar to a student loan. So I would compare the SBA programs closer to the college loans because in both cases, you signed up to pay them back. Now, my problem with what Biden tried to do with...
and he's not done.
He's not done. But what he tried to do in this, and you look at it, and the Supreme Court voted it down 6-3. I mean, he didn't have the constitutional right doing that. He did not have the authority to do that. The sad part about that particular case, that should have been 9-0. The three liberal justices got involved, and they had all their excuses, this, that, whatever.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, it's flat out: the president does not have authority to do an executive order to cancel debt. So again, that should have been a 9-0 vote. That's what the sad part in that case is. But it's no different than if you stop and think about it right before the election. Biden comes out. It's like, let's give you a $10,000 student loan. Well, what did Walz do over in Minnesota? Well, every family was going to get a $2,000 rebate, or I don't know how, $2,000 per person or whatever rebate of their $18 billion surplus. Well, he kind of bait and switched them too.
Sure did.
He cut it down to $260 a person. So
Spent it all.
So they're different programs now. The problem with the student loans and the kids borrowing all this money is, maybe they're not at the right school. Maybe they're not at the right program within that school. Maybe they should have a little foresight instead of, spending $50,000 at a private university. Maybe they should be at a Valley City or a Mayville where you can get a great education for next to nothing.
Yeah, good point. With a heck of a lot less debt.
Exactly. Or work a little bit, have no debt.
Yeah, no debt. There you go. Fascinating conversation on a whole host of topics. We're going to do this every month with Kent Busek from Busek Olson and Associates. Tap into that business brain. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott, and you have a great week.